Handhelds are dead. What comes to mind for you when I say handheld gaming? Maybe it's the Nintendo Switch, the Steam Deck, the PlayStation Portal, or whatever this snazzy thing is. As I've been enjoying my time recently with my new 3DS, a wave of memories crashed over me. I remembered that handheld gaming platforms used to be something entirely different from what they are now. They had their own unique libraries of games and unique hardware designs. When you bought a game from one of these handhelds, you knew that in many cases, that was the only place you were going to get that experience. It was an exciting time in gaming then, and it's an exciting time now, but for very different reasons. Hi, I'm Brandon, and I think somewhere along the way, I forgot that I used to love handheld gaming. If you've never spent much time with games made specifically for dedicated handhelds, like the Game Boy, the DS, and the PSP to name just a few, this might be an eye-opening conversation, because they were all very impressive in a way we don't see nowadays. It really does feel like I just forgot about how many games I played on handheld systems and how much I enjoyed it. I've had a Switch since maybe early 2018, and I have barely played it in handheld mode. I always go for the big screen when I can, and for a very long time, I thought I just didn't like playing handheld. But that's not true. I've owned plenty of handheld systems in my life. I started on the original Game Boy, the big guy. As far as I knew, I was the only kid in town with a Neo Geo Pocket Color. I was insanely excited for the Game Boy Advance, and it turned out to be amazing when I got one. I had a Nintendo DS, I got a PlayStation Vita, a 3DS. Out of all the major handhelds, I'd say I had most of them. Why? Because I loved the experiences I had on them. When I was a kid and an ice storm knocked out our power for a week in the middle of winter, I spent days huddled up in as many blankets as I could find, playing Metroid Fusion on my Game Boy Advance. I used up a lot of batteries that week. When I knew I was going to be stuck in the car for hours, I would take my Game Boy Advance with me and play for as long as I could before I finally succumbed to the motion sickness. I knew it would come, and I still chose to play Golden Sun, or Castlevania, or Metroid, or Advance Wars. I did love playing handhelds. When the Nintendo Switch came out, we had traditional home console quality gaming experiences wherever we could take a Switch. It sold like delicious pancakes, and everyone wanted a piece of the action, players and game companies alike. Then we saw a major breakthrough in PC gaming handhelds with the Steam Deck, which was followed by numerous competitors, and this kickstarted a notable push for PC games, even the most graphically demanding among them, to have settings options that allowed people to play them on less powerful hardware, like these handheld PCs. In the blink of an eye, I started seeing these handhelds all over YouTube and gaming news. Traditional handhelds often felt like they were more aimed at younger players than adults with jobs and families, but with the indisputable popularity of the Switch and the PC handheld boom we're seeing, people of all ages and gaming preferences are actively enjoying and discussing the joys of handheld gaming platforms, and it's wonderful to see. But something definitely changed along the way. Older, dedicated handheld platforms like the Game Boy could only fit so much game onto the cartridges you put into it. The screens could only display so many colors. For a long time, most had only a few buttons, limiting the potential complexity of their control schemes. And these earlier handhelds relied on disposable batteries. If you think battery life is important now, it's nothing compared to what it used to be when you had to go out and buy new batteries to play more. When those batteries start getting low, well, I hope your game has frequent save points. The monochrome Game Boy from Nintendo was king, no doubt about it. And while it had predecessors, I feel like this is where handheld gaming as we know it truly came into being. But it wasn't the only kid on the block. Oh no. It had Sega's Game Gear and its color screen to compete with. In Japan, at least, it was also up against the monochrome Wonder Swan from Bandai. And shortly thereafter, the Wonder Swan Color. And shortly after that, the Swan Crystal. And then no more swans. The swans flew away to a farm where they lived very happily. Nothing bad happened to the swans. Moving on. I could never forget the Neo Geo Pocket from SNK, or rather the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which I actually had. I loved that thing. With so few buttons and such limited graphical capabilities compared to their contemporary home console counterparts, it's no wonder that the games on them were so unique. If you only have 2 main buttons, yeah, you're not going to be doing anything too crazy. Look at this Game Boy. See all the buttons there? That's everything. Nothing on the back, nothing on the sides. You get a D-pad, start, select, and then A and B for all of the common gameplay inputs. 2 main buttons. Sometimes limitations like this can bring focus, and that's definitely what we saw in a lot of games. Look at Castlevania Legends on the Game Boy here. Jump, attack, jump, attack. As we can see in the manual, it gets slightly more complex by combining inputs, but that's it. Ever heard of Alone in the Dark? It had an entry on the Game Boy Color and PlayStation. They were not comparable. It's not exactly a fair comparison, and even just looking at the visuals of the Game Boy Color version here, the 3-dimensional effect they have going on is pretty impressive for the hardware. The Game Boy Advance added L and R shoulder buttons to its A and B face buttons, and that felt like a huge upgrade. Aside from the fact that it only had 2 main face buttons, it was like carrying around a tiny little Super Nintendo. It was beautiful, and games took advantage of those shoulder buttons to allow players to do more. Look at Samus angling her shots diagonally. Wow. Look, it was impressive at the time, okay? Then we switched to 3D capable handhelds with the Nintendo DS and the Sony PlayStation Portable. I would say this is where it first started to feel like handhelds were getting close to console level experiences, especially with the PSP. Better screens, rechargeable batteries, more buttons, and the PSP even had an analog nub, closely mimicking the experience of an analog stick on a PlayStation DualShock controller. Developers could create more complex, fleshed-out experiences, and they kept charging forward with the handheld generation to follow, the Nintendo 3DS and the PlayStation Vita. The trend of adding more buttons for normal gameplay basically ended here, but only technically. For instance, the 3DS got a circle pad, effectively a flat sliding analog stick, and the Vita got 2 tiny analog sticks to replace the little nub the PSP had. Both were moving toward more precise controls like what you would find on contemporary home consoles, and the types of games we saw on them started to reflect this. Killzone Mercenary on the Vita was a major milestone, proving that handhelds were capable of far more than they used to be. The line between home console game and handheld game was blurring, but notably, not gone. The idea of portable experiences was still alive and well, and we saw plenty of games released for them that were smaller in scale and, like most handheld games up to this point, cheaper than console games. Traditional handhelds specialized in portable experiences and usually lacked the ability to play on TVs. They had a singular focus. Now, traditional handhelds are dead and gone. Their spirit lives on only in the homunculus that is the hybrid, a beast of convenience. Handheld one moment, on a big screen the next. But that says nothing of the games we play on them. outside of the indie scene, I mostly see the same kinds of games we would expect to see on dedicated home consoles. Our handhelds have all the same buttons as home console controllers, sometimes more. So the only thing that could really hold a game back on handheld is technical performance. We get the same stories told with all the same cinematic flash, we have our reflexes tested with the same action sequences, and we get all the same content. The lengthier games that used to be stuck on home consoles are now what we play on the go with our fancy handhelds. It feels like the game industry's priorities have shifted away from creating simpler, more condensed experiences and toward creating the same expansive, nearly all-consuming experiences across all platforms at once. It makes sense, but having recently played some of these older handheld games, it also makes me a little sad. At a glance, they might seem like inferior options that only exist because they couldn't be any more complex than they are. But to me, they represent an alternative, less demanding way to tell stories and have players engage with them. Sometimes it's really nice having a simpler game on hand that I can jump in and out of when I don't have it in me to dive into something more complex. While technology has come a long way, and our games can go with us almost anywhere these days, the types of experiences we see being released week after week are nothing like what we used to get. These new games are massive in scale and budget, and there's very little room for the kind of tight, condensed experiences we were so accustomed to when the hardware had so many limitations in place. Things aren't all doom and gloom, though. It is a dream come true to be able to play mainline Zelda games anywhere thanks to the Switch. When I first played Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, I couldn't even imagine having such an expansive experience on the go. And look at us now. We have Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, both designed to produce incredible experiences on a hybrid platform. Then we have the army of handheld PCs. Without limitations like we used to see in handheld hardware, we are free to explore Night City, to look into the mysteries of Quietus, and torment ourselves in hellish halls whenever and wherever we please, using whatever control scheme we prefer. We are spoiled for choice, and with the Switch 2 and its mouse controls on the horizon, this trend is only set to continue. The idea of playing what are traditionally mouse and keyboard affairs like Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous on handhelds becomes not only possible, but maybe even an equally good way to play them. Only time will tell, and I think it'll work out well in the end. Times change, preferences change, games change, and apparently my memory changes. I cannot believe just how much my memories had faded. There was always something different and magical about playing handheld. Thanks to my new 3DS, I'll have plenty more opportunities to explore these incredible, more traditional handheld games. And my Steam Deck will still get plenty of attention, of course. Long live handheld gaming. What do you think about all this? Have games changed as much as I think? Have I simply been looking in all the wrong places? Let me know in the comments. If you're wondering why I decided to pick up a 3DS now of all times, check out this video. Alright, go find some fun. Peace.